All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Tracy from SoCal Moms, as you know, and we've been speaking a great deal today about parenting in a pandemic and health tips for parents. And now we're delving into a new conversation with Dr. Wendy Sue Swanson, pediatrician and chief medical officer at SpoonfulONE. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Nice to be here. I wish I was in Southern California with you right now.
I know. I think we're going to say it a lot and have said it a lot. We wish we could all be together live in the sunshine, but here we are virtually, hopefully reaching more families than we could have in the past, and sharing a lot of really helpful information. So we appreciate you coming and doing that today. I wanted to open just with having you tell us a little bit about SpoonfulONE, how it came to be.
Sure. So I'm a mom to two. I'm a pediatrician and practiced pediatrics for 12 years and then started working in the innovation space. And 3 years ago, joined SpoonfulONE in really the revolution of trying to change more quickly how we feed babies, because the opportunity of these critical periods in early life of really kind of shaping who we are, and not in a hokey pokey way, but in a really kind of, patented science way. Data out of Stanford University was used to establish the company of SpoonfulONE by our founder, Dr. Kari Nadeau, who runs the Allergy and Immunology Center at Stanford. And, her goal was really starting to recognize that as we think about feeding in early life, the new data that's come out in the last basically 6 to 7 years has shown that what we were saying for 20 years was wrong. And not only did we need to reverse guidelines, but we needed to figure out ways to make it feasible and easy for families to follow that. So I had spent really the decade before that working on kind of teaching families and understanding the science and safety of vaccinations and using digital media in different ways. And my call to join Dr. Nadeau was really at SpoonfulONE to realize that there was a way to get into people's homes in a meaningful way that then would allow kind of, there are 4 million babies born in the United States every year. Yep. If you look at the data now, 8% of children under the age of 18 will end up with a doctor-diagnosed food allergy. That's 320,000 babies a year. And if we didn't wait, or if it takes us too long to get families to understand the new science, right, we were kind of missing the opportunity. So that's kind of my journey. And I've been working with SpoonfulONE now for 3 years and teaching pediatricians, doing education, helping families and parents understand the new science, and then understanding the kind of convenience of how do we put this all together, not just talk about peanut, but really talk about nutrition at large and the way that our early life, those infant and preschool years, how they shape from a standpoint of our immune system, how it shapes an understanding of food protein and what that means as a child grows up.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because so there's like a double challenge, I feel like now, right? Because it's completely different. So you're explaining to people who maybe had a kid before these guidelines came out, how they have to completely change their sort of behavior and all the things that they were afraid of, right? I have a 9-year-old, we were all afraid, don't give peanuts, don't give this, don't give that, right? And now it's the exact opposite. So there's a huge education piece, but I think what you touched on, which I want to ask you more about, is equally important, which is that we're just thinking differently now about nutrition and our kids. Mm-hmm. And how we go about introducing foods, what foods we introduce to them, when and why, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just completely different. Like I started with rice cereal with my 9-year-old, right?
Yes.
So now I have an 8-month-old, so I'm like really in it.
And we're like the perfect example, right, of what we did and what we want to do. And an 8-month-old is a beautiful example that your 8-month-old's immune system is learning profound things, right? We immunize early in life, and families all know this starting at 2 months of age, because we want to get you protected as early as possible for the longest time. But because the immune system can learn so much and it can preserve that learning and memory for so long. But let me go back, because I want to talk on the guidelines, because I think whenever medicine at large makes a shift in some way, people are a little bit dubious or an additive change. But this is a frank reversal, which doesn't happen in medicine all that often. And that is back in the year 2000. I was still in medical school out east. We were at the time saying to families, shoot, food allergies are on the rise. There's something about this modern environment that makes us more susceptible, which we know, which is the overuse of antibiotics kills off our normal bacteria. We're not getting as much vitamin D as we used to, probably because we're good at sunscreen in some ways, and also that we're not maybe eating it in our diet so much. And that's probably changing it. The detergents we use to clean Our clothes, for example, might break down our skin and make us susceptible. And then all these studies from around the world that show that kind of hygiene hypothesis concept that if you raise your baby, in the city, in a high-rise condo, versus you raise your kid on a farm in a rural part of this country, the kid on the farm has a much less likely chance from having asthma or allergies and even food allergies. That playing in the dirt, being exposed to all sorts of diversity early in life is really important. And that in our modern world, we just have less of it at baseline. And we believe in the last, 30, 40 years, the reason we've had a doubling of food allergies each and every decade, meaning from the 80s to the 90s, the 90s to 2000, 2000 to 2010. Each time we had a new decade, food allergies were doubling each time. You can't explain that with genetics alone. So genetics are a risk factor, but we know that the way we live in the world is different in that way. So in 2000, we told people, no, when my first son was born, no peanut till 3, no egg until 2, no dairy till 1. It was exactly the wrong advice. And if we learned it the hard way. Food allergies continued to rise. Then in 2008, the American Academy of Pediatrics said, no, don't do that. But it wasn't until 2015 when a landmark study about peanuts came out in the New England Journal of Medicine. They took babies as young as 4 months of age who had eczema, broken down or dry skin. It's the number one risk factor for food allergies. And they started feeding them peanut at least 3 times a week, all the way through infancy, toddlerhood, preschool, all the way to the time they went to kindergarten. So it wasn't just like, oh yeah, they gave them peanut early one time. It was, they gave them peanuts constantly throughout that early part of life. And they found the babies that were fed peanut early and often had an 80% less likely chance of developing a food allergy. And the science was really explained that when kids have eczema or broken down skin, they get exposed to food particles through their skin. And if they're not eating them, that tends to be kind of what we call a sensitizing process, where the immune system doesn't want to first learn about food through the skin. The immune system, 70% of your immune system is in your GI tract, so from your stomach all the way down and through your intestines. And it wants to learn and be presented food through the stomach. So here we were telling moms not to feed their babies, and dads not to feed their babies any of these foods. And then kids were getting exposed to them just from the environment, dust that's in the environment, or mom just ate some almonds and then picks up baby with eczema, and all of a sudden baby's getting exposed to almond through that skin. So that's when we started to turn everything upside down in 2015. And it was really primarily about peanut, because everyone wanted to move really cautiously forward. But fast forward to 2020, the USDA for the first time has just put out guidelines that says when your baby's 4 to 6 months of age, we want you to introduce not just peanut, but we want you to introduce fish and crustacean like shrimp, soy, sesame, oat, wheat, egg, everything, meaning that getting those foods in early and that diet diversity is like raising your baby on a farm. It's not just one thing at a time. It's like throw it all in the pot, right? And get it into your baby's diet early. And so I think, those guideline shifts have been really confusing to moms. And then there's like the mother-in-law factor, right? Where you're doing something and your mother-in-law is like, don't do that. We don't do that with our babies, right? So you're always kind of combating the old knowledge with this kind of new knowledge. And then otherwise too, that it's scarier, it seems like, to introduce. It's kind of like you take a really healthy baby and people are scared about vaccinating them, even though we know you're much safer to have a vaccinated kid, right? Like that you have this opportunity to avoid infection. And the pandemic has taught us that more than any other time. And I think it's scary to introduce things like peanut or even fish or egg early in a baby's life, right? When you start solids at 4 to 6 months. But we know that each month that you wait, the likelihood of increasing an allergy goes up. And for example, babies that I have families that don't introduce peanut until 12 months of age, a study out of Canada called the Child Study, that if you waited till 12 months, baby was 4 times more likely to develop an allergy. If you wait till 18 months, 7 times more likely to develop an allergy. So later is certainly not better. It might feel better, but it's not better. We know the earlier you do that and the earlier you keep them in the diet and the longer you keep it in the diet, your baby just grows up with the immune system saying, oh yeah, I know peanut, I know soy, I know pistachio, and they don't overreact to that and go down that allergy process. And the hope of this next generation of parents today, and this goes towards any time. I mean, diet diversity, of course, is good for us at any age. But what we're hoping is that we're finally going to not just stabilize the development of food allergies, but we're going to reverse those numbers and have it go down.
So talk a little bit about how you start, because you make a good point, right? It's now overwhelming maybe in a different way for people. Right now they think, okay, not only do I have to figure out feeding my baby just like as a premise, right? But now I have to think about all of these allergens, and there's a lot of them, beyond peanuts, right?
Yeah.
And how I'm gonna consistently, you know, feed and introduce and all of that process. So, I mean, how do you look at that and what do you recommend? And I know too, there's sort of some differences to people start at 4 months or 5 months or 6 months with like quote unquote first foods.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, you've just been through this because you have an 8-month-old, so you know so well, but I'll go through just kind of medically how we do it. So I'm never going to tell you what day is the right day to start your baby on solid foods. You and your baby get to decide that. Your baby's going to show you signs of readiness, right? That ability to hold their head up, the ability to keep their trunk kind of supported if they're in like a little bumbo chair, right? The idea that they're like watching you when you're at a meal and they're like looking and smelling your pizza, you know, kind of like licking the air, right? They'll show like an emotional awareness about food, right? And also a developmental readiness. And then you're going to choose. And whatever the first food that a family wants to choose is the great food. It just doesn't matter which food is first. You know, like you and I were talking, you know, like we all did rice cereal in the beginning because you could put it in express breast milk. It was this little flaky stuff. And then we started to realize, oh, shoot, rice is laden with all this extra arsenic because it's, you know, it's basically raised and grown in fields with all this arsenic from the soil, blah, blah, blah. And then we vilified rice cereal, which is fine. I don't think you need rice cereal. I think it's a super basic grain. I don't think it gives your baby a ton of nutrition, but you could probably have a little bit of it in your baby's diet and it's fine. And I think what we want to do now is not have families think about food introduction as like, is my baby reacting? But to think about food introduction as great joy, like sharing the things that you love, your mother's recipe, your father-in-law's recipe, your neighbor's recipe, the thing you used to make for your girlfriends in college. It doesn't matter, right? You get to decide in little bits that are age appropriate. So you pick a first food, you do that. When baby takes, you know, a spoon, opens her mouth or his mouth, able to show you that they can swallow it, you can introduce at the pace that you want. In fact, I think if we start to encourage families to say you introduce a new food every meal or a new food every day, that's an amazing goal. And it can seem overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be because you've got so much stuff in your refrigerator, right? So go and reach for commercially available baby foods, but know this, they don't have any of the common allergens in them, unfortunately. We just did an audit of big box retailers and hardly any allergens, meaning, of course, there's not fish and shrimp in our baby foods, right? There's unfortunately not soy or peanut or cashew or pistachio or sesame, the number one growing allergy in the US. So you're going to have to kind of grab things and put them into your baby's diet. But if you have a goal where you say, I'm just going to introduce a new food every day, we know it's a safe way to do that. And it's a way not to go too slow. But you get to decide what they are. And frankly, you get to decide what order they're in. But one thing that you can't do is wait on those foods that I think pediatricians like me have made to be scary in the last 20 years, and they're not scary. In fact, we know, of course, the safest time to introduce common allergens to your baby is the earliest time because they won't have had time to develop an allergy in the first place. And we also know, you know, nature has really kind of designed for this. So, you know, we don't see infants dying of anaphylaxis. I mean, it just doesn't, thank goodness, happen. What we see is that if a child, for example, there's lots of research studies that show if your child had already developed an allergy when you decided to feed them a food, we know the number 1 and 2 side effects or symptoms that you'd have is hives and vomiting. So if you fed your child a food and then within, you know, minutes to an hour or two, the baby developed hives all over their body or vomited kind of repeatedly right after eating, you'd stop feeding that food and you'd go talk to your pediatrician about an investigation. But the number one thing is, you know, peanuts are game. Bananas game, peaches game, shrimp is game, fish is game, whatever you're feeding, right? If you want to kind of contribute to what your dinner is, what you're feeding your 9-year-old and what you're feeding your 8-month-old can pretty much be the same. And the more diet diversity you get, so the more variety of food on a daily basis, the number of different proteins that go into that baby's tummies every day will decrease the likelihood of them having allergic conditions at large. And there are great studies on diet. Each individual additional food you feed on a daily basis is protective, which is kind of mind-blowing because the baby food sources like peach stage 1, pea stage 1, peach stage 2. You know, it's like this really slow kind of hygienic way. Yeah. When our great grandmothers, when we didn't have a lot of food allergy, we're just kind of putting it all in the pot, right? And people were feeding it to babies, you know, in ways that I think are much more holistic. And that's what we've got to get back to if we're going to get rid of this modern susceptibility problem. At least it's the one lever. We can't probably change all the detergents. We can't change exactly the vitamin D situation. Not everybody can raise their baby in the presence of a dog that brings in all sorts of good microbiota into the house. But we really can how we, change the food that we feed our babies in early life.
Yeah, well, and I think it's an interesting point you make, because in one way that actually makes it easier, right? Because we're also worried about, planning it out, and you have to give this food for 3 days before you give another food, and then you are trying to like segment foods, right? Only this food, not that food, and all this stuff. So if you have the opportunity to really just sort of bring your baby into your kitchen and eat what you're making, and sort of engage them in that process, I think it is, like you talked about, more sort of joyful and more fun and more part about having a family meal and all these other pieces than just so strictly about this one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of manufactured this like baby food way, right? Like I said, like this kind of hygienic single food, when in reality we've medicalized it in that way. And I'm actually saying demedicalize this. Stop being so protective. In fact, your efforts to be slow and cautious might actually cause your child increased risk, right? The longer you wait, the more likely that a child could develop a sensitivity. And the longer that you wait while a child's immune system is growing, the kind of worse off. So, there are a couple, like all things in life, there are a couple of exceptions, that if you have severe eczema, for example, if your baby, has severe eczema. Now, severe eczema is, let me just describe it at large. It's pretty common. About 1 in 5 babies will have a little bit of eczema at some point during their infancy. That is dry, flaky skin in little patches usually. It can cluster in different parts of the body, like what we call the flexor surfaces. So inside the neck or inside the folds of the arm or inside the folds of the knees. And if it's mild, usually you don't have to do anything except, keep your baby really covered with good emollients and good creams and things. Then there's kind of moderate, which flares up here and there. And sometimes your pediatrician will give you a prescription for it. And then there's severe eczema, which is big, huge patches of eczema all over the face, all over the scalp, all over the body that cracks and bleeds. That's the kind of eczema where I'd say, go talk to your pediatrician. We know your child's at very high risk for developing a food allergy because we think they're going to be exposed to, basically food particles through their skin. They will want you to get peanut and other common allergens, fish, shellfish, shrimp, all that stuff into the baby's diet, but they may want to do it with you in a more strategic way. If you're not a family with severe eczema, I want you to throw it in. Like, I want you to get it all in. And, SpoonfulONE, our solution, is just a food solution. Although it's not just in the sense that it is scientifically developed out of a large research trial that was done at Stanford. And it's just 30 milligrams of like a little piece of a peanut equivalent of each one of the 16 different foods that are known to cause the most common allergies in children. So it's all the tree nuts, it's peanuts, it's soy, it's sesame, it's milk, it's egg, it's 2 kinds of fish, it's shrimp. It's all kind of blended up into a little mix that you pop into like a little pureed baby food that you make yourself or you buy at the grocery. And or as your baby grows, you can do little puffs and crackers. And the goal is to say, eat all these table foods, like introduce exactly what we were talking about. Like, you start with whatever you want, you encourage and bring all the foods that you love into your baby's life. But every single day, make sure that you're getting a whole host of all those different proteins in that baby's tummy so that they're growing up just like they're living on a farm, but a farm from the table, right? Like, the table is coming with all that diversity so that you don't miss that window. We don't know exactly when it is, if it's early infancy or late infancy or toddlerhood, when it's most important. But most immunologists that I've talked to all over the world will tell you the earlier, the better. So breastfeeding is great. Formula feeding is great too. Breastfeeding provides additional immune support, but in and of itself can't prevent the development of food allergies. It does prevent the development of eczema, which is a risk factor. So breastfeeding is great. But if you're a mom who's not unable to make all of that, or you're not a mom who's breastfeeding, I don't in any way want to get off track in that, to say, when you start these complementary foods, you get to bring this bouquet into your child's life. And even when you're breastfeeding, you might not. Dr. Karina Venter, who's a nutritionist at the University of Colorado, does lots of research. And she's the one who has really helped me understand that breast milk has these proteins. So if you're eating a great diverse diet as a nursing mom, but sometimes not at the levels that are seen by the immune system in meaningful ways during infancy. And that's why the complementary food start can be so crucial in protecting your baby, and why we see these ongoing studies continuing to show the really good benefit.
Well, and you started to talk about it, and I want to sort of focus more a little bit about SpoonfulONE and your method, because the point is, right, there's so many allergens that it's like a 2-part process, right? So on the one hand, it's great to feed them as much as you can, as often as you can, and introduce all of these foods. But the other side of things, it's hard for people to do that, right? In a meaningful way to get into their babies enough of all of these different allergens, right? And so that I think is where your solution comes in, because it's complementary to feeding them this wide variety diet that we're all aspiring to do. But when we start feeling like, you know, I mean, first of all, my baby does have eczema. So like for us, it's always like a little bit of a hard decision. And we're always kind of on the edge of like, should we give this? Should we not give this? And gets a lot of like eczema flare-ups from different things. But at the same time, like even when we've tried to give things, he doesn't always want them. So like the other thing that we've run into, which I know a lot of parents do, is like, well, my kid, I gave him peanut butter, but he doesn't like it, right? Or he doesn't like egg, or it's hard for me to get him to eat it, or different foods. And so I think that's why it's really important to talk a little bit about like your guys' solution, the different forms it comes in, and then why that is complementary, because it's hard to feed everything consistently.
Yeah, well, you bring up so many different things. But let me pick off a couple of them to start, though. So, you know, one of the things that has been like this big epiphany for me in the last year is that when we did this audit, when we were realizing we're launching in a big retailer this summer, and as we were preparing for that, we have a lead in our retail sales. And as a pediatrician and ethicist, I never would have been exposed to this. But when we did this audit, we realized these proteins are not in baby foods. Like there are no nuts in baby foods. There are no shellfish in there's no soy, there's no sesame, there's no dairy. I mean, it's crazy, right? They're devoid of these different foods. And so, you know, this challenge of like, how am I going to get them all in, let alone some babies right out of the gate eat like Hoover vacuum cleaners. And some babies are kind of picky, right? And take their time. Like the texture bugs them, the flavor is overwhelming. Like, you know, they kind of like heat, and you never know which baby you've got. And yet we know increasingly, we want all babies to have all this diet diversity, because when you look at food allergy families, you know, 2 out of 3 children with a food allergy don't have a parent with one, right? Because it's not all genetics, even it's not all eczema, right? It's not like every baby with food allergies has eczema, although most of them do, because we know that's one of the risk factors. So to your point, it can be really hard to like have your baby's hunger and interest and curiosity for food match. You're now like, I want to ace this, right? I'm going to master feeding. And that's exactly why Dr. Nadeau did this. You know, I think in pediatrics, we always want to kind of protect families from unnecessary things. It's just the philosophy of pediatrics. It's just like a less is more, right? I spent 12 years in practice trying to get people to stop buying stuff. It was just like, you don't need any of this stuff, you know? I mean, we like some of these things and good for you, like go get them. But in this case, this was about the realization that, for example, a study called the EAT trial looked at breastfeeding moms, and they started as young as 3 months of age. And they tried to have these moms get 6 different common allergens in every single week, just a couple of times. So it was like, you know, peanut, milk, egg, sesame, and fish. And they wanted those moms to just do it twice. And, you know, less than 40% of the moms in this trial were able to get those foods in every week. But the ones who did, those kids didn't develop as many allergies, right? But it was super hard to do that. So Spoonful, I'm going to just grab this because it's sometimes it's kind of hard to explain. So
yeah, I think it'd be great if you can show us, and especially if you
like a product. Like, so if you look at, I don't even know how this goes in the camera. So this is a little packet. It's only full to about here, full of powder. So that half, the rest is kind of air. This was designed to not take a large share of your baby's tummy. Because of the reality, babies aren't going to eat but a couple hundred calories of additional food when they start complementary solid food. So if you go do a teaspoon of peanut butter mixed in some oatmeal, you're done, right? That high calorie, high density food, great for baby, but likely going to satiate them to a way that they're not going to ask for another thing. So in the SpoonfulONE mix-in, can be used as early as 4 to 6 months whenever you're starting food. And it was really designed to be put in solid, like pureed foods, right? So you open up the pack, you know, you basically mix it. I can even just show you in my hand. I mean, it's just like this powder. So in that powder, if you look at it, it's like it tastes, someone said it tastes a lot like the Lucky Charms that aren't the marshmallow part, you know, like like
the little,
and so it's all 16 foods. So it's those 2 kinds of fish, it's shellfish, it's the tree nuts, it's soy, it's milk, and it's all at 30 milligrams. And that's one of the levels of protein serving that Dr. Nadeau fed kids for a year and then looked at their blood studies afterward. She also tested those higher levels that were done in those peanut studies, but she found the same effect at this lower level of protein. And so the solution was very intentionally designed to say, I'm not going to take up a lot of your baby's tummy. You're going to put this in a little bit of pureed, whatever you want. avocado, peach, pea, I don't care, whatever you want. Express breast milk if you want. And you could spoon feed that, or you can put it in a bottle. We have a bottle compatible form, but it doesn't dissolve because it's food. So it gets in the bottle and you can shake it, and you just need to use what's called a fast flow nipple, right? One of those stage 3 or up nipples.
Okay.
But it's designed basically to get all of them every day. It's not to replace food, not at all. It's to say, you bring this stuff to the table, but every day that baby's tummy's immune system is going to get a little presentation of peanut and a presentation of oat and a presentation of that milk. And then as your baby grows up, we have different forms, because the thing is, it's not just about introduction. It is about the long game, the very unfortunate reality, like exercise.
You have to be consistent, right? This is like everybody's challenge with all things.
With all things. It's very American to have like a silver bullet, right? But the reality is, as the baby grows, right? As your baby grows, the immune system's going through all this developmental change in time. And so what you want is over and over and over again. And Dr. Nadeau is very strong about her philosophy that it's about feeding all this diet diversity on the same day, every day, that the circadian knowledge from the immune system learns and grows. And so the next products, for example, we have these little puffs. So this whole packet of puffs, which is, it's hard to know, but it's like a handful of puffs that they're kind of the dissolving puffs with a little hole in the middle. So after 6 months of age, you can give your child the whole packet of puffs on a daily basis. Has the same amount of protein as the little stick pack of each one of those 16 foods. And the goal is you just keep it in the diet on an everyday. And you could do it yourself. But the problem is, we probably won't. I mean, that's the reality. It's like less is more, of course. And when we've even, gone to the grocery and had some of our food scientists go and say, like, make recipes and get all these foods in a baby's diet over the course of a week, it's just really hard to do. And that's what I think Dr. Nadeau knew. And I think with the knew when she created the study way back, in the kind of early 2015-16 time, and then founded the company in 2017, it was like she wasn't going to wait. And with the USDA now being really clear that it's not like, oh, get peanut in your baby's diet at 4 months. They're like, get all these foods in your diet and get diet diversity. But they also recognize babies aren't going to sometimes you have a really good feeding day and sometimes you have a hard feeding day, right? And what we want is consistency between both days, that every day is an opportunity to just grow up in the presence of all these foods so that babies don't develop these allergies.
Yeah, well, and I think, one of the things you said that I just want to talk about for 1 minute, which is, it's still, if someone uses this system and they do it every day, that's going to help them. They're going to get consistency. They're going to get all these things, but it doesn't mean they're not going to overdo if then they put some peanut butter in their baby's oatmeal. No. So it's all complementary in terms of that's the whole thing, is that you're still feeding all these foods, but you don't have to worry if you didn't get them all, or get your egg 3 times a week or whatever it is. This is helping you build this base on a daily basis, right? And then you're still introducing the foods, because there's wanting the kids to eat the foods, right? Not even just about allergies. But
and flavor preferences, there's a really critical window between like 4 and 7 months where you want your babies to get all different flavors, bitter, naturally salty things, naturally sweet things, not add it. You don't want to add anything, but you want to bring those all to the table. SpoonfulONE has got one flavor. I want babies to get exposed to all those foods. But to your point, it is kind of that insurance plan to make sure that the immune training per se, right? That those peptides are in that baby's belly every single day, especially if they've got eczema, because they're going to be exposed to these kinds of foods through their skin. And what we know from those studies is that if you're concomitantly feeding with your tummy, the tummy will win. The tummy is the tolerizing organ that says, this is how we stay healthy and avoid the development of allergies in the first place. So.
Okay, that's really helpful. I just wanted to clarify for people so they had that piece clear. But I want to ask you one final question, which I think ties into a lot of what we've been talking about, which is obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? And so all of our environments are very sterile, or we're trying to make them super sterile. And, babies like ours haven't been out of the house, haven't seen other people. And so I think, to your point, if anything, their environment is the smallest maybe of any babies in a long time.
In a generation, yes. So,
So what's your advice related?
Yeah, I was speaking with an immunologist in Ireland recently who's doing samples on babies in Ireland. And what they're finding is their fecal samples are completely devoid of diversity at this point, right? These babies have been stuck in these bubbles. So more than ever, moms and dads have to be intentional, right? The pandemic has afforded a totally different environment. And I believe it's unfortunately deviated towards the modern susceptibility environment, which is more hygienic and less less kind of set up from a standpoint of creating tolerance. So moms and dads can do everything in their power to bring their babies to all different places, to make sure that they're allowing their children the opportunity to be exposed to all these foods all the time early in life. And don't go slow. Do not be scared of these foods at 4 to 6 months. They're not scary. They're only scary if you wait and they develop. So, using a solution like Spoonful One and being super intentional about not going too slow, and moms and dads can feel really good just about that you have this data backing that this is a smarter way to feed your babies than we did a decade ago.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think all of us, so many things we're worrying about, but I think this was really helpful in sort of finding the joy in a lot of this part of the stage, and also doing what's best for our families and our babies and their health.
Yeah, well, feeding should be it is one of the most like having our baby sleep really peacefully, super delightful. Feeding our children and having them love it, super delightful. You want a lifetime of fearless eating, and the way you get there is what you do early in your baby's life. So it's huge.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. We're excited to have you guys join us for the rest of the day in your brand room. So usually what we say to everyone is, if you have questions, and I'm sure you do, I still have questions, go join them in their brand room in the expo hall, ask questions, learn more, and try out Spoonful One. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks for having me.